We are at a juncture of facing challenges unparalleled in history, and these problems are global in nature, such as climate change, gender parity, security, and many more. In a hyper-connected world, the sources of these challenges are multidimensional and span across borders, which requires global solutions. And finding solutions to these unprecedented challenges fundamentally requires new ways of thinking. Many of these global solutions can only be possible when there is a peace and harmony in the world. Finding solutions to these unprecedented challenges fundamentally requires a complete innovative way of thinking with a kind heart. This is your host, Swami Sri Parambadur, and you are listening to Leadership in Crisis. And we have invited a very, very special guest and a peace leader, Mr. Steve KILLELEA. Mr. Steve combines a highly successful career in technology with a philanthropic focus on peace and sustainable development to shed new light on issues from terrorism and conflict to economics and prosperity. He founded the Institute for Economics and Peace in 2007 as an independent, not-for-profit global research institute analyzing the intertwined relationships between business, peace, and economic development. Steve's funding and thought-a-lot leadership behind the institute would see him recognized as one of the world's 100 most influential people on reducing the onset of armed violence. He's also the founder of the Global Peace Index, the world's leading quantitative measurement of global peacefulness, ranking 163 countries and independent territories. Steve currently serves on the President's Circle for Club de Madrid, the largest forum of democratic former presidents and prime ministers working to strengthen democracy. In 2010, Steve was appointed a member of the Order of Australia for his service to the community through the Global Peace Movement. And in 2016, he was awarded the Luxembourg Peace Prize. Steve is also the author of Peace in the Age of Chaos, the best solution for a sustainable future. Steve has many, many, many kudos. If I keep on talking about his kudos, it may get into probably itself an hour. So, Steve, we really are fortunate to have you as a peace ambassador on this planet, and we welcome you to Leadership in Crisis.
Well, thank you, Swami. It's very good to be here, and I'm feeling very happy and privileged about speaking on your show.
Thank you so much. So just to begin with, you are one of the Australia's leading IT entrepreneurs. What motivated you to start the Institute for Economics and Peace?
Sure. Look, if we look into my background, as you've said, I started off in business, set up 2 IT companies. First one ended up public listed on NASDAQ and the second one on the Australian Stock Exchange. So really, when I look at my background, I started off as a programmer and sort of, along with a couple of other guys, invented the programs for those 2 companies. And from that, I sort of made a reasonable amount of money. So from there, I set up a family foundation to work with the poorest of the poor. And so it's done over 220 projects now in different parts of the world. Direct beneficiaries, about 3.6 million people. So reasonable size, nothing like a Gates, but reasonable size. Working with the poorest of the poor took me into a lot of war zones, near post-war zones. It was in northeast Kivu in the Congo, which is one of the more violent places in the world. I was walking through there and I started to think, what are the most peaceful nations in the world? Mm-hmm. So I searched the internet, couldn't find a thing. And I thought, wow, that's really important. So from there, established the Global Peace Index. But in many ways, that creates quite a profound question. Because a simple businessman, such as myself, can be walking through Africa and wonder, what are the most peaceful nations in the world, and we haven't done it, then how much do we know about peace? Simply, if you can't measure it, can you really understand it? And if you can't measure it, how do you even know whether your actions are helping you or hindering you in achieving your goals? You simply don't. But as it moved further on, what I then started to realise is we didn't know a lot about peace. And that was simply if you can't measure it. And when we did, it was more of a moral description. Was quite often associated with religion, which is all really good. But all of it was qualitative. There was very, very little quantitative work around. And I think because my background in maths and such from the computing, I was just naturally drawn that way. But even when we go into peace and conflict centres, what we find is 90% of the time when we think we're talking about peace, we're actually talking about violence. And the study of peace leads to different outcomes than the study of trying to how to stop violence, because they're not really the same thing. And just best way of looking at it is with an analogy.
Mm-hmm.
So let's think about medicine, okay? We go back to the 50s, great breakthroughs with the pathology. We're not going to die of a heart attack young, even curing cancers today. So really important. But what does it take to stay healthy and well? Right exercise, good mental disposition, correct diet. You're not going to learn any of those things through studying someone on their deathbed. You're only going to learn it through studying people who are healthy. And so the same analogy comes back to peace. Study the healthy societies, the ones which are really strong. Then if you know how to build they have the right levels of resilience, they don't slip into violence. And that way you avoid the trap entirely.
Wow. It's amazing. I think the way how you have even thought about creating this with a simple idea. And as you rightly said, I also follow a lot of the Vedic scriptures and all, but it is all about when we talk about the peace, it's the peace of the mind. And we always think about the qualitative things, but we never thought of how to measure this peace. How can we make it quantifiable peace? And that is a very profound impact you are creating in the society just by the thought of creating how many peaceful societies are there. So it is very interesting. So going a little further about it. So what is this? I know I read about the Vision for Humanity and the IEP website, what you have provided. It is a lot of detailed information. But can you talk about, as you mentioned, the peace is the absence of violence. But what is the peace in your own definition? I know I saw there is a negative peace and the positive peace and the framework. So can you give a little bit more about on the peace itself so that the people can understand what is this peace we are talking about?
Well, I think first up, peace is many faceted. It's got so many different flavors and colors. And so what I realized after many years, what's important with peace is to understand the outcome you want, and then you use a definition which is appropriate. So look, let's say if you look at politicians, quite often they talk about peace as being when the war stops. Well, that's when the guns fall silent. We're looking at inner peace. You could see it as being the absence of afflictive emotion, okay, or equanimity would be another way of being able to describe inner peace. Now, sort of for the Global Peace Index, because we want to measure it, we use the absence of violence or fear of violence as the definition of peace there. Now, that's really good because that's something which you can really measure, and it's great. So now you know the state of peace, and you know whether you're getting more peaceful or less peaceful, but it tells you nothing about the conditions you need to create peace. So that brings us back to another type of peace called positive peace. There are other types of peace as well, like peace with justice. If you had a human rights lens through it, you'd see that as being paramount. But we've got positive peace. We use the definitions, the attitude, institutions, and structures which create and sustain peaceful societies. Now, what's profound about that piece of work is it's not my thoughts, it's not the researchers' thoughts. We arrive at purely through mathematics. So we use mathematical modelling, statistics. We've got about 50,000 different data sets, indexes, attitudinal surveys down in Sydney. So we then do quantitative analysis with that against the Global Peace Index to understand what are the factors most closely associated with peace. Now, we take the ones with the most statistical significance, the ones which are not replicated, the ones with the best data sets. Now, that gives us this definition of positive peace. We then use more mathematical techniques. Now we clump it together so we can understand which of these factors are sort of closely related. And that gives us an 8-part topology, which we call the pillars of positive peace.
Oh.
And so from there, this is where it gets, from our angle, really quite interesting. You now turn that round into another index. And now what you've got with the ability of that now is you can now see whether these qualities which create the peaceful societies, whether countries are improving on them or deteriorating on them. And so that now means you're looking at sort of a virtuous or vicious cycle within nations. And so vicious cycle we describe where deteriorating, virtuous cycle when it's improving. But the positive peace, then, what we found was also related to a whole lot of other things. A great measure of resilience. Mm-hmm. Countries which are high in positive peace have less civil resistance movements. They last for a short amount of time, more moderate in their aims, more likely to achieve their aims, and are far, far, far less violent. Positive peace is also associated with a lot of other things in society we think are important. So countries which are improving in positive peace, on average, have 2% per annum higher GDP growth rate than countries which are deteriorating. Find the inflation rates, interest rates are less, inflation is 7 times less volatile. You'll find that sort of the measures of the sovereign ratings, where countries improving in positive peace, they tend to improve. When they're deteriorating, they tend to deteriorate with it. If foreign direct investment is bigger in countries with high positive peace than low positive peace, and measures of well-being and happiness are higher, performances on the ecological management are better, and I could keep going. So what we're really saying when we look at positive peace is it describes an optimal environment in which human potential can flourish. And I think the thing which blew me away, really blew me away, was that the qualities which create peace also create all these other qualities which we desire as well. So you can actually, but peace in that case becomes a byproduct of focusing on the development of society. And that takes us into a whole new realm.
Yeah, I know. I think in a way, what you mentioned is so good, because if the positivity is there in the country, then automatically the growth is already growing up. But when you are talking about this positive peace, are you working with any specific nations? I know you said you are talking to 163 countries. So if a country has to be peaceful and you already created a framework, we want to know a little bit more about the framework, but also once you have within that country, who are all changing? Are we going into the masses to do the changes? Are we working with the civic societies or the governments? Where the impact would be, and how, when you measure something, who do you interact with? Who are the people who have to take the steps to make it better?
Well, it works at all sorts of different levels. So I think it's a great question, Swami. But if we look at it, we can operationalise positive peace at 2 levels. One, you'll say it's the national level or state level, the others at the community level. So the framework, these 8 pillars, they consist of the things like well-functioning government, a strong business environment, equitable distribution of resources, acceptance of the rights of others, free flow of information, high levels of human capital, good relationships with neighbours, low levels of corruption. So they're the 8 pillars. They come together work as a system. So we don't see it as being causal. One pillar doesn't necessarily be the major influence of the others. And it can change in different societies, which pillars you need to focus on the most. And that'll be on the dynamics of different societies. So at a community level, let's say, I'll start there and come up higher. So at a community level, let's say this is an actual project which came out of Rotary, which is the largest civil organisation in the world. And so this was in Uganda. They were working on a project there, which is a literacy project, doing it for a couple of years, and no real improvement in the literacy. And it was a very, very poor part of Uganda. And so then they took the 8 pillars of the positive peace and looked at the project through that. So well-functioning government meant they started to engage the local elders in the community, got better engagement with the headmaster of the school, and other sorts of things like that. So the free flow of information, they got on a radio station and spoke about it on the radio station, about the project they were doing. The two things which really made a difference, one was acceptance of the rights of others, and that was for girls, and because a lot of them 4 days a month weren't coming to school, and that's because they were menstruating. So provided pads and then separate toilet blocks for them, and that engaged them back into it better.
Oh.
And then the other thing, which should never come at when you're looking at these kind of things normally, is good relationships with neighbours. How can a school have bad relationships with its neighbours? It doesn't seem right, does it? But what happened is this is a very, very poor part of Uganda. So the kids at lunchtime were going into the yards of the neighbours, because it was in a rural setting, and raiding the fruit trees. So in these environments, every apple, every orange really counts. And it was causing real friction. So they planted some trees in the yard, but then also introduced some porridge at lunchtime for the kids. A couple of cents each, that's all it costs. It's really cheap. But what happened at the back end of that, because they're talking about it on the radio, so that's your free flow of information, attendance rates at the school jumped from being in the about 246 up to about 830.
Wow.
The scholastic performance, 30% of the kids were in the top 2 grades within the district. The back end of the program, 60% were in the top 2 grades. Now, what happened is this place is so poor, when parents heard on the radio station that kids were getting a free meal, they would encourage their kids to go to school, whereas before they were encouraging to go out and forage to try and get food for themselves. Because the lack of nutrients, the kids' brains weren't alert in the afternoons. The porridge at lunchtime meant they just stayed more concentrated, and therefore the scholastic improvement. It's quite remarkable. Now, that's just one example. So we've got organisations like Rotary International, which are rolling this out globally through their 34,000 clubs. That'd be one example. Now, if you move further up and you come up at a national level, what we can do there is we can take these, because you've got plenty of good data, we can take these pillars, and then we can very quickly divide them into 400 different subcategories. And from there now, you've got quite a rich data set to be able to analyse a society from, to get it, and then you look at which ones are improving, which ones are deteriorating, how do they rate with their neighbouring countries. So that's always a very good indicator of how these measures are. And then now it starts to give you a map of where to actually focus. Now you map that back against these 8 pillars of positive peace and make sure that you're stimulating all the different parts of the system, which you can see through these 8 pillars. So we're working with the groups these days like the World Trade Organization. They've created a peace bureau. That's for the accession of new countries into the WTO. And so they're using our framework in a lot of the training and work they're doing out there. So that'd be another example of being used at a higher level.
Wow. So it says you have really defined a complete working framework to go from the communities to the national. And then also you have a case studies like Uganda, where the scholastic performance has been multifold within a couple of years. So it's a continuous and consistent implementation has to take place to see a desired outcome. I'm sure this also requires some kind of a peace ambassadors. And I see your IEP is really encouraging everybody to apply. So can you give what is the benefit and who should apply and how is this going to be helpful for the society?
Sure. So we've got a number of different training courses. One's a Positive Peace Academy. It's about a 4 to 6 hour course. You can do that online. Get to that through Vision of Humanity, the website Vision of Humanity. The other thing we do, which is more extensive training, is to create Iep Ambassadors. And so one, you have to do the Positive Peace Academy first, then you go through and there's a series of online seminars which we run. So we've trained about 3,500 people now globally as Iep ambassadors, and we train about 250 every 6 months. So if people are interested in that, then we go to Economics and Peace, the website economicsandpeace.org, or you can just search on IEP, Institute for Economics and Peace Ambassadors, IEP Ambassadors, and get to where you need to go to through doing those things. But to fully encourage it, we've got people all around the world, ranging from India to Nigeria, been training quite a few people in Ethiopia lately, and so Pakistan. So people, as well as obviously many through Europe and the US as well. So it's a global program, and we get great feedback on it. And once people are trained, they've got the ability to go out and give presentations on our work and to be able to create projects in their community. That's what they wish.
So once they go through this program and then once they become ambassador or a peace ambassador, so will they be carrying the torch of this peace for a certain period of time, or is it their lifetime goal that they have to be continuously doing?
Well, it's really up to them. You don't want to put too much restrictions on people and what they do. So once they're trained, they've got the ability to go out, and then you've got more information to focus on peace. You've got a network then too, because we've got quite an active network with the ambassadors. We've got Facebook pages from them. We've got other forums from to share as well. So you've got a network then you can actually talk to about peace, actions you can do for peace and such. So there's a lot there which can be done,
No, I think that's good, because at least you have creating a cohort of peace ambassadors, so people can come up with the different countries from the different global perspectives, and then they can exchange the ideas and what is working on, what is not working in their country, they can always do. I know with this COVID, probably we all are, Zoom bombing right now, or virtual meets, not in person, but do you have anything to create this kind of a peace ambassadors meeting once in a year in a normal world once COVID is done?
Oh yeah, we regularly when we're in cities without COVID, we pull everyone together and have a bit of a get together, chat. It's usually a presentation from one of the senior members of IEP staff, and then sort of everyone talks about what they're doing. And so again, this is back to creating the network. But in this day and age, and I think it's one of the advantages from COVID, look at us and look at the way podcasts has taken off under COVID. It's amazing. And you look at the quality, and I realise this is a recording, and it's not a video, but you look at the quality of the two of us on screen here now. It's amazing. So you can create virtual networks where you get 40 people on a screen, which are all positive peace ambassadors, and you can share your experiences, give different projects. And so one of the things we do is through the Facebook pages for the IEP ambassadors and on our website, Vision of Humanity, we feature a lot of the better projects which people do. And that's great. People love it. It's nothing like doing a project and having the ability for the world to be able to see it.
Absolutely. And I think with the framework and with your quantitative approach, every project has an outcome. And obviously with an outcome-based model, everything is good and you're creating a more peace and spreading that peace. And that leads to an interesting topic about the book, what you wrote, right? Peace in the age of chaos. So can you give a little bit about a snippet about the book and who is it aimed for, and then how people can get to buy the book?
Sure. So Peace in the Age of the Chaos, it's got a number of themes running through it. One of it's an entrepreneurial story about setting up a global think tank. It also covers my personal journey to peace and covers a number of the different projects which came out of my family foundation, which really influenced me. So it's got stories in there as sort of the working with child soldiers in northern Uganda, for example. It's working in the projects where we did the child survival projects in Tanzania, and working with some great monks in Myanmar who are providing free education for 10,000 kids. So it's got some of the more, how can I put it, some of the stories more from the edges of hell. And then it's got some of the stories of sort of just transformational people you meet in some of these areas. But then, so that's the backdrop to make it interesting. But the core message is really about peace. Okay, what is peace? How do you create peace? How do you apply systems thinking in being able to look at our societies and better understand them? And also positive peace. How is it? How is it developed? What does it mean? How would you go about implementing it? And also just the state of global peace. How has it changed over the last 15 years, for example?
Okay. No, I think, with you being an entrepreneur and also coming with that mathematical modeling, we never found a person talking about the peace, because we always think peace is like a form of a person, human being, and we always think about this spiritual, because I also follow monk, and we also talk about the meditation and how you need to keep your mind peaceful and all. But this approach, what you gave, the quantitative approach, and also using the system thinking, is very thought-provoking. And it gives a different kind of a mindset and a mathematical modeling. So that's really interesting. So, but that also helps, when we are talking about, as a founder of the institute dedicated to measuring and understanding peace, you are frequently asked if world peace is possible, right? So when you're doing all these things, we know that right now the world is peaceful, not. But how do you feel? Is the world peace possible? What is your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, okay. So look, just one thing, if people are interested in peace in the age of chaos, you can get it from all the normal places online. We've got a website you can go to called Peace in the Age of Chaos. You can buy it off Amazon, Google Books, other places where most people go to buy books. So it's high up there, or just search on Peace in the Age of Chaos, and 3 or 4 or 5 options will come up for where you can purchase it. So maybe I'll start with just a word on peace. How is peace going globally? So if we look back over the last 15 years, we'll find that 86 countries improved in peace, 75 countries deteriorated. Okay, but peace actually overall deteriorated by 2% in that period. So why is it so? And that's because when countries fall in peace, they fall much faster than they rise in peace. And that explains the difference. Now, as we drill down into it even further, we find that some areas of peace are improving, like homicide rates globally have been dropping for the last 15 years. So that's something which is really good. Now, but also militarization for most of that period was dropping as well. It was a long-term trend, but that reversed 2 years ago. And now we can find that militarization is increasing. Mm-hmm. So now we can go and now we can look at other things like, let's say, violent demonstrations. So if we look at violent demonstrations, riots, general strikes, they've increased by 261% in the last decade. And so that's an ongoing trend. So you've got all that built in there as well. And so if you come down now, let's say you look at positive peace, changes in positive peace over the time. Now, gets really fascinating because you've got 75% of the countries globally have actually improved their positive peace. But now, positive peace is divided up into 3 different areas: attitudes, institutions, and structures. So structures just keep on improving. And they're things like life expectancy, per capita income, gender equality. So those things just keep improving. Institutions, however, they've just had the smallest improvement in the last decade. So the institutions aren't good. And so in a lot of places, the institutions have slipped backwards. Now, if we start to now dig down and look at attitudes, now attitudes have come right up, particularly, let's say, particularly in a number of Western European countries and the US. So attitudes are things like group grievances, concept called fractionalized elites. That's where the elites fight amongst themselves. That'd be epitomised, let's say, by Brexit or the last US election. It's a classic example of it. So the elites fight between themselves more and more rather than focusing on what's good for the country. You've got corruption. I have to iterate, perceptions of corruption are on the increase. Faith in democracy is on the decrease. Misinformation is on the increase. And so there's some of the things which are associated with attitudes. And so that's the area I think we really need to be looking to, where we need to really try and get a renaissance. We need to come back and improve. So just drive it home. If we looked at the US, for example, it's had the 6th largest drop in positive peace in the last decade.
Wow. That's interesting. You every aspect you are able to quantify, and we are able to see the percentage, whether it is increasing or decreasing year over year. And you're also seeing where we really, in the spectrum of the peace index, the global peace index, out of those 163 countries. So it's amazing. So as just a closing remarks, I want to ask you, what is the relation between the business and the peace, and why do you feel we need to have a peaceful business?
Right. Well, the two are interconnected. So as mentioned earlier on, and when we're looking at positive peace, the qualities of positive peace not only create strong, peaceful, and resilient environments, they also create an optimum environment for a business to function. So let's look at it in a bit more detail. Well, well-functioning government, we can see how that's good for business, can't we? So if you've got a well-functioning government, you've got clear laws and regulations, you've got courts which function effectively, let's say in intellectual property disputes. Free flow of information, well, what does that mean? It means you've got better pricing of transactions because you've got transparency. You've got a fully informed market, which we all know is good for business. High levels of human capital. Obviously, business needs intelligent people to be able to do it. Equitable distribution of resources, and that doesn't mean equal. It's different in different societies and depends on the societal contract. So what's equitable in the US, it would be different to what's considered equitable in, let's say, Sweden. But equitable distribution of resources means that more people have more money to spend because it's distributed more, and that way now you have a more robust economy. So that's just some of the ways it all interacts together. But I think the takeaway point is just that relationship between GDP growth and positive peace. Countries which are improving in positive peace, 2% higher per annum GDP growth rates than countries deteriorating. And similarly, what we did is we took the stock indexes in the countries which were having the biggest improvements in positive peace. Then we compared it to the improvements in the stock indexes of the global average, like through MSCI and things like that. So we invested in the stock markets when positive peace was having the biggest improvements. You would have got a 34% higher return over the last decade. And that it really drives home just how meaningful peace is for the business environment and vice versa. So a lot of the time people say to me, well, it's business's responsibility to create peace. But I always argue back, it's not. They're just one actor within a large framework. And so it's the whole of society's responsibility to create peace. But what's really important for business people is to realise that peace is instrumental in creating the background conditions for their businesses to thrive.
Absolutely. This is, I think, one of the profound podcasts I had in the last couple of years with the COVID. I'm doing leadership in crisis, but this peace leadership is so fantastic. And you have told in a very simple and a very quantitative approach with a framework, and you gave that 8 pillars. So I think very much eager to go into your visionofhumanity.org and the IEP website. So I will encourage, and then I'll put more ambassadors are needed. So thank you so much for giving and enlightening everybody to become a peace leaders and peace ambassadors. So any last takeaways you want to say, and we'll close the day?
Yeah, well, I guess in many ways, sort of, I've been talking about society. So peace in many ways is bottom up and top down. So, well, obviously, the attitude, institutions, and structures of society affecting individuals, and they can create the environment in which human potential can thrive. But on the other end, the collective consciousness of individuals also shape society. And so at an individual level, we can all do a lot about peace. It's simple things like when you go get a coffee, smile at the person behind the counter. It gets started, you get a little bit angry, you just sit on it for a little bit before reacting. They say that when you're angry, quite often 90% of what you perceive is your imagination, and 10% of it will be accurate. Focus, and so a lot of ways peace comes back to the individual in many ways, and peaceful people generally, happy people, they've generally got more energy because they're not consumed in negative thought. So in many ways, peace is very, very much an individual effort as it is a societal effort.
No, thank you. I think I'm working on publishing something on the acts of small kind, because that is very, very important. As you simply said, a person can just go to a Starbucks and take a coffee, just smile at the person and thank you for the coffee, because even though we are paying, the person is genuinely having interest and making us feel good in our starting of the day with the coffee, just like you and me having a good tea. So it's always the small acts of kindness is important, and it should start with the individual. So thank you so much for a great information and insights on the peace and the framework. And we're definitely looking forward to have the world peace together. And I'm sure with this podcast, most of the financial people may be betting on the peaceful countries to increase their the finance sector. The profits will be arising.
Well, thank you for having me on the show, Swami.